Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Taniya Bethke. I'm the Director of Operations for the Council to Advance Hunting and the Shooting Sports. And we are joined today with some wonderful guests who are going to help us flesh out this continuing conversation around how to build out your team to include broad skill sets from across your department. And so I'm going to hand it off to the other members on the call today to help introduce themselves, and we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the call. Ross, go ahead. Why don't you lead us
off? Good morning, afternoon, I guess. My name is Ross Scott. I'm the GIS coordinator for the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks. So we actually coordinate all of the data resources within the agency amongst a small team, and really making sure that we keep R3 at the forefront of every decision that we make.
Wonderful, thank you.
My name is Nikholai. I'm with South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. I'm a GIS database manager. I've been getting involved with R3 and trying to explain to our team how GIS can be used in a variety of ways, and hopefully just be able to touch on a couple of these and hopefully spur some ideas for you guys.
Great. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. Lance?
I'm Lance Cherry. I am the Communications and Marketing Manager for the Council to Advance Hunting and the Shooting Sports. Happy to be here today.
All right. Well, this is going to be a great conversation. And so first of all, Ross, I don't know if you would mind just telling us a little bit about your background with Game, Fish, and Parks and working with GIS across teams. For those of you that are viewing this webinar, I used to work closely within this team, and Ross is their lead and has an incredible perspective on how to work across divisions.
Yeah, full disclosure, I got into the business because I like maps, but we've really moved light speed ahead when it comes to actively associating data with decisions being made. The history with our organization when it comes to working with vendors such as Esri. We're very big users of their products, whether it be for mapping applications, custom apps, dashboards, any sort of reporting purposes. They really do work well with a number of our processes, and other vendors such as Microsoft and Google and the email things. So it's really easy and seamless to train and have staff become proficient at creating products that support outreach, education, marketing, as well as some of our internal database needs when it comes to how we operate as a business and support some of the decisions when things need to be decided, whether it be at the department, commission, or even our state legislative level.
Great. I think that whole idea around being able to allocate resources in an intentional way is something that's attractive to all of us, right? And the more data that we have to help us make meaningful decisions, the better off we're all going to be. So I think that's really the root of this conversation, where we can take this. So I don't know if you'd like to queue up your conversation, or queue up your presentation here real quickly and start off with some of the kind of innovative strategies you've used with Esri in South Dakota specifically, but I think we can move there next. All right, so go ahead, Ross or Nikholai. I'm not sure who comes next, but tell us a little bit about what you worked on here.
Yeah, so we're going to give you a presentation here about basically how, kind of a brief history of what we've done already in South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks, and kind of where we're going. And to start that off, give a little history of what we have done. Ross, if you want to go ahead and explain kind of what we've done with Esri in the past and talk about that.
Every time I see this slide in this dashboard, I get excited because Taniya was around when this was developed. And what we were able to do as a outdoor recreation agency is to take our licensed sales and georeference them based on the license holders information that we have. And it's really important to see where our licenses sales are being sold at, where those people reside at, and what they're actively buying. And so with this dashboard example, it's really neat because we're looking at the unlimited license sales across the state at a snapshot of time. So for example, our fishing or hunting licenses, or often combination licenses, there is no limit on how many licenses can be sold. However, we do want people to get out and use the outdoors, and this is a great way to track and demonstrate where that is happening. So if you look at the map here in the dashboard, it's all interactive. Even though it's a screenshot, you can see the state of South Dakota broken down by county. We can tell where the highest density of license sales are actively taking place. If you also look very closely, you can actually see a bar graph at the bottom here showing what time of the year we're experiencing increases and decreases in license sales across the state. Even though the colors are a little bit darker around some of our major cities, I guess you could say, for South Dakota, you also see some rural areas that do have a pretty dense population that hold licenses. So this dashboard is really neat and was certainly new at the time to help justify a number of things. One, what are we going to do in the COVID pandemic starting in 2020? We relied on this weekly, if not daily in some cases, to justify some of our marketing and outreach and keeping seasons open, getting people outside. This is also a great way to compare a snapshot in time against another snapshot in time. On the right side of the screen, you can see an example data for 2021 license sales. We also have 2020 license sales there. Again, it's example data, but at the same time, it's all interactive. If you look at the left side of the screen, you can actually look and see South Dakota residents. You can toggle that and work with non-resident participants. You can look back even further for years that we have available to us. So this was a really important tool for not only the GIS team to develop, but for other teams to rely on, because this is something that does the work for you. You can point to the product and say, look at what's happening. Look at this change. Look at where we're focusing our efforts, or maybe we need to refocus our efforts. It opens up a lot of doors to how you interact and approach and engage our license holders.
Ross, to that point, I remember being in my office and a member of your team walking in with this dashboard saying, hey, is this useful? Would you be interested in something like this? And I can't tell you how excited I got at that time, because I remember looking at this thinking, holy smokes, I've spent days of my life hand tabulating all of this information for commission requests, or I've had to peel through all of the pivot tables and access tables of licensing information and try to pull out the trends, and the dashboard instantly did it for us. And so I know for our 3 practitioners who are listening to this, you may be at any point along the pathway of having a variety of tools at your disposal. You might have an internal license sales system that is just an access table, all the way up through, you might have a really amazing vendor with really powerful dashboards and just amazing interaction with the data. But no matter where you are on that spectrum, there are some tools here that I know Nikholai and Ross can share with you to help enhance the ways that you engage with your data. And this was definitely just the first step in a long process that South Dakota has gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, again, being the first step and seeing where we come in a matter of just a couple of years is neat to see. I'm probably underestimating that, because the more things that we do, the more questions we want answered. You start seeing trends. You start engaging staff, decision makers, or even our constituents in a variety of ways. Some folks prefer numbers in a table. Some folks prefer interactive maps. This is all of it in one platform, this one service. And so it's a really unique opportunity to take what we have maybe in a number or a currency format and display it across the board.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a kind of a brief history of where we're at, where we have been. Going forward, this is just looking at our licensing data that we've had. And traditionally, at South Dakota Game Fish and Parks, that data has kind of been siloed. And what we're really going after for the future is can we combine this licensing data with other efforts that we do to really measure our success with some of our R3 programs. And we are moving to a vendor called Brandt, and they're really hooking us up nice with a nice system that will let us basically connect these dots. So different efforts that we do, we can look at that and then combine that with our licensing data to even take a dashboard like this, but elevate it to the next level. And just a few key points on that, kind of what we've gone through, and maybe some of you others, folks out there, have kind of experiencing the same thing. You can't just build a dashboard like that without having a good data structure to everything that you do. And so that's an important key step to doing any of this, is you can't answer any of these questions unless you have a good data structure. So traditionally, before we switched to using Brandt as our database kind of third-party solution, we've had all these data points, right? And maybe some of these data points were dealing with our hunting licenses, or like you saw on the dashboard, or some permits or surveys or park passes or camping. And our customers are doing a lot of different interacting with all these different data points. They all have a relationship towards each other, but it was really hard for us to tell who's taking an education class, and is that person in that class, have they ever bought a license before? Do they go on to buy a license before? So questions like that, we've had a hard time answering, and hopefully, and you can see how kind of convoluted all these different lines are. It's hard to answer a question when you have going back and forth between so many data points. And what the Brandt system that we're adopting basically is going to centralize everything to a customer ID for us. So now we have that customer ID, and we can take away all those lines. So everything goes to the customer ID now. And so now we can easily relate who's taking our classes. Does that customer go on to buy a hunting license? Do they go on to buy a park pass? And do those people go camping? And so that's just something that you want to consider. Maybe talk to your GIS folks or your data folks, and making sure that you have a good centralized structure. That's the key thing, is having it centralized and being able to have these relationships and have it be really simple to power the dashboards.
I think there's a lot of tools out there that can do that. And you guys are working with Brandt. They're an excellent resource in this field. And there are lots of vendors that have that kind of capacity to centralize data points across a state with all your customer interactions. So thank you for highlighting just that kind of that data structure, and kind of that, how that specifically can deliver on, to help you deliver on good customer engagement.
And that's not to say that, if you just have your licensing data, like we've shown before in that dashboard, you can still do plenty with that. You don't have to have this big centralized system that's interacting with all the different components of your organization. But even if you just have your licensing data, you can still do so much with that. And there's another product that Esri has called GeoEnrichment, and you couldn't even so now we can take our licensing data, do what we did in that dashboard, but now we can basically enrich it with some tapestry data to really kind of go the next step, and be able to answer maybe some of these high level questions, and maybe inspire some new questions as well. And so that's what GeoEnrichment is all about. It's about, you take a location or area, and you want to know about what are the people in these, what are the people in this area? What are they doing? What's their hobbies, business practices, things like that. And it can be any type of area. It can be, a county, a city, hey, a drive time from a certain location, and figure out what is going on in these communities, and basically tie that to your licensing data to hopefully maybe answer some questions. And not just with licensing, but basically anything that's R3. You'll be surprised when I show you how much GeoEnrichment data is out there for you. And one key thing too is, our South Dakota Game Fish and Parks, we use Esri for a lot of our GIS platform, but GeoEnrichment literally was a product that they offer, and essentially it was no cost to us to use this aspect of the Esri platform. It's something that was available and that we just didn't really know about. And then I kind of saw it, and I went to Taniya when she was with us, and was like, hey, what do you think about this? And, really got her excited, and, really inspired the team to hopefully maybe answer some of these big level questions. And so with that we'll keep going into this. Like I said, it's about the people, places, and businesses. So maybe you want to know some good examples. Hey, has this community participated in target shooting or fishing or camping? You know, are they buying hunting and fishing equipment or other sports equipment? Those are some of the questions that we'll be able to answer. And just a quick note here is, you know, there's data sources for all the way. There's data providers and methodologies for how this data comes about. So, you know, if you do get questions about, hey, you know, how is this data? How are you getting this data? How are these? Why are the numbers these? You know, there's Esri provides their data providers and how they their methodologies for some of the statistics that they provide. I won't go into those, but if you do, just know that they're out there and you can easily search as Esri's pages for those. But one thing I did want to touch on is the lookup data provider by statistic. And I think this is more of a tool just to kind of show you what is all out there for data using the GeoEnrichment platform. And so this is the GeoEnrichment data browser. And, you know, there's a lot of different variables that are listed here. But, you know, what I really like to do is if somebody comes to me with a question, I like to search for that variable. And so at one time, a staff member came up to me and they wanted to know, is there anything about target shooting, for example? So I'll just type in shooting here and just see just to show you what kind of data you'll get back. So we get two variables back, and you know, one is basically it's participated in target shooting in the last 12 months, so you can get the raw numbers. But then you also get the participated in target shooting last 12 months index, and the index is a key thing to know about the GeoEnrichment. And basically, what an index is it's a number with 100 being the national average. So if you have an index of 120, you know, you're 20 points above the national average. So you're participating in target shooting at higher levels than the national average. Or if you're below 100, then, you know, you're the area that you're looking at participates in target shooting less, you know, than the national average. So, you know, that's available. But you know, yeah, population, age, you know, you can click into these, really explore some of these. So this is just looking at the population, but then they have all these subgroups within the population, you know, language, gender, age. And there's so much data here that it's crazy. There's consumer spending, it's behaviors and things like that.
Could you click into one of those reports, one of the index reports for us?
Like click on population. Sure. And
show us maybe language, like Hispanic or Spanish speaking.
Yeah, so here's some metrics on the language kind of data that you can get, and it looks like they break it down here by age and language that is spoken. So you kind of have your minors, youth, you know, speaking Spanish and English. And it looks like even different levels too, which is kind of insane. It's just crazy how much data there is. And then, you know, here's the big, probably, you know, 18 through 64. Look at some of these other language that they have here. You know, I'm scrolling. I'm still scrolling. I mean, that's just kind of one variable too. And there's tens of variables, maybe even hundreds of variables out there. There's so much stuff here. It's crazy.
That's wild. So if I wanted to know people of a specific age that predominantly speak Spanish within a certain demographic, we could pull in this information, lay it on top of a map, and I could tell that basically across the state of South Dakota.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could, like, hey, I want to look at the county level. Maybe is a good example there. You know, what's the speaking population for adults 18 through 64 in some of these counties, and then, you know, you could cross-reference that with, you know, the age of and still looking at the same counties and try to draw some conclusions there. So wow. There's a lot of different things you can do here. And we'll go into some of those examples here. But like I said, you know, we can look at age, gender, race, wealth distribution, disposable income, household income. What's a community like? You know, aspects of a community, you know, spending habits, and all of these different things. And so we got approached, I showed Taniya this, and I think word spread around a little bit throughout the office. And one of the first use cases that really came to us, a staff member approached me and they're, hey, we're looking to build a new shooting range. Is there any way that we can incorporate this GeoEnrichment data and help us hopefully try to make a decision on, get some data behind, some reasoning behind where we want to choose this. And so this was kind of our first stab at it. We're still pretty new to this whole GeoEnrichment, at South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. And so this is the first stab, and hopefully you find it just as exciting as when I showed it to our staff member. And I'll go ahead and explain it here once it loads. So there's a lot of different components here, and I'll try to break this down, as smoothly and quickly as possible. But, we basically looked at, we geo-enriched at the state level, and then we did enrichment at a county level, and kind of compared those two. And so, like I said, the index is a nice measure to compare across counties or different areas, because it kind of normalizes the data for you. And so if we just look at South Dakota as a whole, when we look at the participation of target shooting, and this was for 2020, South Dakota gets an index of 124. So we're 24 points above the national average. So
can I just chime in, Nikholai?
Sure.
Like, directors across the country and R3 teams across the country who don't necessarily sell range permits have been dying to know what participation in their states and counties look like in shooting sports. And so for you to be able to show us that there's a GIS tool out there that can provide an index of what participation in your state looks like is incredibly powerful. I just wanted to highlight that, and thank you so much for incorporating that in your presentation.
Yeah, South Dakota as a whole, we're doing pretty, I'd say 24 points above, that's pretty good, I'd say. And then we can also look at that at a county level too. And so we kind of listed the counties here on the side with the index and the county name. I mean, we have some counties that are, 83 points above the national average, getting close to, that 200 mark. That's really good. And so these counties are doing really well. That isn't to say that, we do have some county, this is just looking at it relative to South Dakota, I should say. So if you're below that 124 mark, those are the counties that, they don't have as high of rates. They're lower than the average in South Dakota. They could still be higher than the national average, but, in South Dakota, we want to focus on South Dakota, and we want to try to get those numbers up. So we want to know, what counties are lagging behind the average. And so, we have those counties shown in red, and that's what this map on the left-hand side here basically represents. I'll blow this up for a second and just zoom in. But basically the counties that are that bright blue, they're doing really well. They're doing much better than the average county. And then even the dull or blue, they're still above the average, but still doing pretty good. And then we have that dull red, so they're slightly below the South Dakota average. And then we have that kind of like that bright red, and they're pretty far below the South Dakota average. And so, what this does for you, it just gives you a sense to maybe try to look for some patterns in your data. And is there something that about these counties that are maybe showing up red? Is that going to inspire you to ask another question potentially? And hey, maybe you can go back to the GeoEnrichment data and see if there's data on that question. And so that's the whole idea about this, is to find patterns, to ask more questions, and just, to be more knowledgeable about how you can better focus your efforts by getting information.
As an example there, like just thinking through things that I would look at from an R3 practitioner standpoint, is I see a lot of bright blue counties that don't have a little green dot indicating that they have a shooting range, right? So if I were going to think about wisely using tar mark dollars, for example, to build a shooting range, I might look at those bright blue counties where we know participation is high, but they have to drive really far to get to a range. Like, that's what a cool map.
Yeah, for sure. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, all these bright points on here is our data on shooting ranges in South Dakota. And so, I mean, like Harding County up here, really bright blue, but they're really far from a shooting range. So, that's good information to know. Like, they participate highly. You also kind of maybe have to balance that out with population too. Like the Sioux Falls area, they have a lot of shooting ranges. It looks like 5. how, participation is lower than the South Dakota average, but hey, they have a lot of people there. So it's a little bit of a balance in trying to, weigh all that stuff. But, that's good information to have for decision makers. Some other things this dashboard looked at, we looked at, so shooting ranges, kind of the target shooting falls into the sport expenditures with the Esri GeoEnrichment. So Esri also groups our sports expenditures into 3 categories of $1 to $99, $100 to $250, and $250 plus. Basically, how much money are people spending on sports equipment for a year? And so we just looked at those $3 values, and here's the index for South Dakota, 116 for that $1 to $99 range. So doing well, above average. Again, 100 to that $250, above average again, and then even the 250 plus, pretty much at the national average, a little slightly above. So we wondered is there any, I'm not no humans the dimensions person or a statistician, but I figured just for the sake of this demonstration, can we graph the index of the target shooting participation in the sports equipment? And is there a correlation there at all to maybe further explore? Again, spur some ideas for some folks. And so we have these series of graphs here. And so we have the participated in the target shooting index on the left here, and then the index for spending sports equipment through that $100 to $250 range. And, it's a R-squared value of 0.8. I'm not a statistician. I think that's okay. But, what I can't tell you though is, looking at that, comparing that 0.8 to like the $1 to $99, you get a 0.25 for an R-squared, or the 250 plus, you get a 0.24. So, maybe there's something going on here with target shooting and spending, do our target shooters, are they on average spending $100 to $250 a year on this equipment? Maybe give you some ideas on how much money, these folks are spending within that sport.
Those economic impact statements are huge, right? Like if we're going to assess the economic impact of target shooters and a reason for why we should cater to a particular population in our audience, whether they're target shooters or otherwise, that kind of information can be super compelling. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and just quickly, this last map, it basically takes the target shooting and the sports equipment expenditures and tries to map it, that kind of relationship. And basically, just to summarize it, the bright cyan color, basically these counties are participating in target shooting and spending, at least spending money in that $100 to $250 range. So, and then again, as it kind of goes to that deep blue to that gray to that bright white, that relationship kind of decreases a little bit. So just another kind of way to map that relationship through a spatial reference. So that was one dashboard we did, and then we did a second one looking at fishing, and we'll pull that one up here. Here we go. So we kind of took a very similar approach where we're looking at the counties and we're also looking at the state when it comes to participation in fishing in the last 12 months. So again, there's quite a few more maps here. I'll try to break it down as quickly as possible. But we'll start in the top right here. We have that participation in fishing for South Dakota, 128. So again, higher than the national average by 28 points, pretty good. And then we also have the how much, and fishing kind of falls into this other category of South Dakota, fishing and hunting equipment expenditures. And South Dakota as a whole kind of is slightly below the national average, pretty close though. And again, we did the same thing with the counties on the left where, we're mapping the participation in fishing index for each county. And again, we see very similar, some counties extremely high. And then again, with that bright blue going to that dull blue, and then some counties slightly below that 128, and then some significantly below. I guess the good thing is that we only have 2 counties in South Dakota that are even below the national average, so that's pretty cool to see. There's things like that, and then again, very similar. we want to look at the counties that are, that are, above or below the South Dakota average, again, with that bright blue being well above, going to that deep blue, to the deep gray, to that bright white that is significantly below. So just, another map that basically illustrates that for you.
Again, this is fishing participation index, right? So like,
yep,
bright blue, I can see places that we might want to focus on fishing access, for example, based on participation in those areas.
Yeah, exactly. Just to get an idea, what counties, what are participation rates in a lot of these counties, and I mean, if something that just, a lot of bright blue on the east side of the states, and not, there are some counties over here, but it looks like, the east side, just some patterns that jump out to you. That's what you're really looking for. And then we basically did the same thing with equipment sales. Again, the difference from the South Dakota average. And so again, the same concept, bright blue spending well above on hunting and fishing equipment. And then that dull gray to the bright whitish color, they're not spending as much. And so, it looks to me that like Western South Dakota could be a huge opportunity here, for, potential more income as far as spending on hunting and fishing equipment. Just a lot below than the east side of the state. And one other thing before we get into the other is that, part of this GeoEnrichment thing, tool is that they also sometimes, depending on your metric, they can offer you projections, 5-year projections. And so this was made in 2020. So this is the equipment sales difference from 2025 to 2020, and it looks like for most counties the index is going to decrease in this category, except for one county there. I think when we talked about this prior tonight, I made a good point that the 2020 with COVID, was probably an all-out year for getting outdoors, and so it's probably hard to compare to this year. Anything's probably going to be on the downtrend, but. So that is still interesting. It'd be cool to see what 2021 looks like to 2026. And so there's always those 5-year projections that Esri provides for you as well.
So again, I think if anybody has questions about how that information is created, like you were mentioning, the methodologies for Esri's data can be found on their website. But I think that's fascinating stuff. All of these dashboards, Nikholai, I can think of immediate application by R3 practitioners for placement of programming, of resources, of access opportunities. Like, this is insane. And so I just think about like Ross, Kyle, Nikholai, if we had all never had the conversations that we had to create the connections that we now have of, here are questions that I have, here are the tools that you have to help answer those questions, we never would have gotten here, right? So I don't want to cut you off, Nikholai, but my brain keeps going down that pathway of, I hope people are watching this and seeing, holy smokes, I wanted to answer that question for forever. And there might be somebody on our department-wide team that can help us do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's even in our own department, we have some new staff with the R3 effort, and it's like I need to get down to them and tell them about this because they don't even know. And so a lot of you could be in that similar boat where you don't even know these tools exist.
Yeah, we all work in silos. You come into a position and the position's functioned a certain way for a long time, and you get really focused. All of us get focused on our immediate work and our immediate progress, and it's hard sometimes to break down those silos or work across teams that haven't historically worked together. But hopefully, this is an encouragement to get out and do that. Yeah,
for sure. I just have 2 more maps to kind of briefly go over. It shouldn't take too long, but this one is looking at equipment versus the fishing index, and basically putting that on a map and comparing those 2 metrics. And again, this is going to be a slightly different way, and I think I got better feedback on displaying it this way. But basically, here's the legend on the right, and if you are basically spending on hunting and fishing equipment, you're going to go up towards the right, kind of toward this reddish color. And then if you are participating in fishing, you're going to go up to this blue color. And if you're doing both, you're this purple color. And if you're kind of somewhere in between, you'll fall into one of these middle colors. And so it's kind of a really good way to gauge, like, hey, these counties are participating, these purple counties, right? They're participating in fishing and they're spending money on hunting and fishing equipment. Okay. Then you look at these for these reddish counties here, like at Brookings County and then Lincoln County, hey, they're spending money on hunting and fishing equipment, but the participation is lower, than some of our, other counties. And so that's interesting. They're spending the money, but they're not participating at the same levels. And then you have the blue county, these blue ones, where we're basically, they're participating, but they're not spending necessarily. So, and then you have kind of the white counties that aren't really doing much of either. So could, try to focus some efforts maybe to, hey, how can we improve that situation there so.
Starting a breeding program in Western South Dakota to increase the population. Maybe we might
Yeah.
need to edit that particular comment out of this. Population density is definitely something to take into consideration when you're looking at your maps, for sure.
Yeah, but that's what the index does for you, though. It normalizes that data for you, so it's easy to compare. If you were looking at the raw numbers, yeah, the maps would probably look a lot different, but the index tries to normalize that for you, so you're just looking at the rates. So there is that component of it as well. And then we had one more map. Our fisheries staff were interested in looking at participation in fishing as well as access. So we basically took summarized all our boat ramps, shore fishing access points, and things like that, and then compared that to the participation in fishing. And basically it's going to be the same legend here, where if you're that red color, you have good access. If you that blue color, you're participating but no access. If you're purple, you have access and participating, and if you're the white, you don't have either. So a lot of good. So I think the biggest thing here is looking for those blue counties where there's high participation but no access. And so how can we improve access for some of these counties and things like that? So I think that was a jump out for some folks, and
especially if they're on the river, right? I mean, I see several counties that are right along the river that have limited access, but high participation. That's interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And then again, just to illustrate, this was just a quickly demonstration. I read a quick article that was comparing fishing to some other competing hobbies of anglers, and just to spur some ideas that if you do have some research that you're reading and you try to want to apply that, well, the GeoEnrichment data has a bunch of different metrics, and some of those was that we looked at were how does just quickly participation of fishing versus hunting equipment sales, pretty good correlation. Hopefully that would always be the case. 0.98. If you're fishing, you're probably spending on hunting and fishing equipment. But one of the other metrics that we looked at was they said TV watching was one of the most competing hobbies for fishing. And funnily enough, they kind of have a, I don't know, decent correlation, I guess, for human dimensions. Hard to say. Need to get the actual statisticians in here. But yeah, and then just looking at fishing versus marriage percentage, and and all this, the TV watching, the marriage, that's coming from that GeoEnrichment data set. There's so much, we just touched the surface when we looked at that the data searching tool, and then again comparing fishing to rural populations. And so there's just so much out there, and hopefully this really spurs some idea for you guys, and you can be able to take your data that you do have and maybe enrich it to figure out answers to some of your questions, and who knows, you'll probably end up asking even more questions. So getting back to our presentation, with that pretty much wraps up everything that we had to share with you guys. I know if you do have any questions that we didn't cover today, or that don't get answered, you can always reach out to myself or Ross. So, and our contact information is there for you guys.
That's awesome. Nikholai, you just blew my mind, and I've worked with you and you shared so much more information today, and different ways to use this information in a meaningful way. I think this is incredible. On a cursory Google search, it looks like R squared values greater than 0.35 are significant. So you had quite a few pieces of information in there that showed significant relationships like TV and fishing.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. It just does demonstrate that, what is possible. So
I think that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I think all of this just points to the fact that there are so many more tools available to us as teams if we reach across historically drawn boundaries, right? Like, I know that R3 and GIS aren't often lumped together. Oftentimes you get like GIS, or you get R3 and education, or R3 and communications and marketing. But man, GIS could be an incredible skill set to add to that team. So I think with that, I'd like to ask you to just a couple questions about your thoughts about what it's like to work in this space. And so, my first question for you is, what are some additional ways that GIS could enhance R3 efforts to better understand our customer relationships? Are there any other ways to apply this information that you've seen or that you'd be interested in pursuing?
Yeah, some ways that we've kind of done it here in South Dakota Game Fish and Parks is just, simply when we hold like R3 classes is like, just knowing where we do our classes, how often, being able to take that data and look at it at a map, are we hitting some parts of the state with some classes, or some parts of the state is getting neglected? So collecting that data has, been useful and insightful for folks. Trying to market towards a specific group, I think, I think some of that GeoEnrichment data could play there. There's just a lot of potential there, and I think that the more data you collect, the better. So that's just something to always be aware of. So
I agree with that. It's always hard to mesh information together too later on if you switch between systems. So I think that idea of like collecting more, like edging on the side of collecting more information is kind of helpful when you have to try to consolidate later on.
Yeah, for sure. And, that's why, I think some of the R3 staff came to us, because it's good to collect data, but you also need to have all the validation there to have something meaningful come from it. So yeah, if data is not your strong suit, make sure you get in touch with somebody that it is for them, and they can hopefully really help you out so your data collection can go smoothly.
Yeah, so along those lines, you led me straight to my next question. So if relationships don't currently exist for the folks that are at home watching this webinar, what are some of the considerations you would want them to think through when you're trying to build a relationship with your GIS teams? Like, do you want them to know what flavor of brownies you like so we can bribe you for your information? Or what are some good considerations?
Just lots of frosting and call it good. In my experience here, it's much like actively recruiting new staff. Like, tell them, show them and approach other teams maybe that you don't traditionally think work with GIS or data intelligence, and say, hey, we have these ideas that may affect your program, and show them and demonstrate of why it matters. Having that ability to not only articulate what's important for your own GIS team or your own R3 team, but having that clarity and having that expectation with the freedom to run with brainstorming or going into a meeting room with a dry erase board, and coming up with great ideas is the cornerstone, in my experience, of having these open, honest communications about creating products that are going to help everybody. This is not just a benefit for the GIS team, the licensing team, the R3 team. I mean, this is going to be something that, as you progress through the exercise, we've just demonstrated 2 examples, right? There's 1,000 of other ways to do this. Having those expectations that we're going to have more questions when we're done with this, and keep acting on those as you proceed, is really going to be that cornerstone of building those relationships with those teams.
You're absolutely spot on with that. And I think just that overall awareness that we don't have every skill set on our team, but somebody in the department might, and building those relationships I think that's huge. And not being afraid to just go make friends.
Go make friends. The other thing that we've been successful with in our GIS team, and how we've worked more and more with other teams throughout the agency, is giving people choices. For example, we may showcase dashboards such as what Nikholai has shown before, what Kyle Caskey had created at the front of that presentation. Somebody sees that, they take it back to their office, or they take it back to their team. They say, hey, can you do something like that? Well, absolutely. And of course, everything's a draft, and you work through what people like and don't like, but having those choices is something that we've excelled at with the GIS team within our agency, because there's so many ways to do something we're able to find the data to do it and do it efficiently. And again, tie into that cornerstone of showing why this is important and why this matters to teams and programs outside of our own.
Mhm. Yeah. Those data-driven decisions are so important for efficacy, efficiency across the board. Lance, I don't know about you, but I'm a little jealous of the direction that the team is getting to go in that perhaps you and I didn't have the chances when we were working at the state level. Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you so much I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And I'm just thankful to set this example and for you all to help role model what relationships like this can look like and what tools you have accessible to you to help benefit teams as a whole. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your contact information. I have no doubt we'll spur some further conversation with that. But thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.